It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce our speaker today, Tom Baker. Tom is a former Catholic priest who was inspired to follow a different path in his spiritual journey. He is a student of the Edgar Cayce material and embraces the philosophy and is a teacher of the Course in Miracles. Tom is a longtime student of near-death studies, and he is a professional counselor in our local area. Tom is an ordained minister with the Fellowship of the Inner Light and has served our fellowship for many years. He shares with wit and humor and inspires us in becoming more conscious in our journey through life, touching our hearts on the deepest level. He gets us laughing, which helps us to bring forth new insights that are useful in our own lives and thus nurture life-changing moments. I believe it is in the simplicity of his sharing that great truths are revealed. I see Tom as a comforting presence in our church, and I feel blessed that he is here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Tom Baker.
That was so nice. That really was. Well, we're living in violent times. And in violent times, it's also the time to talk about forgiveness. If the world would forgive, it would not be in conflict. But in conflict, we stop one another. We stop our growth. We stop our love. We hold back and we take sides. This leads to war. It is a bad situation. So we need to forgive. And I'm going to tell a story today about my forgiving my father. Now, the reason I tell this story today is because when we forgive one another, we set the stage to forgive the world. Confucius said that how it goes in the family, it goes in the nation. If we can forgive one another, then we can forgive one another in the world, and perhaps the world can forgive itself. We have to start small in order to do great things. When I was 16 years old, believe it or not, I had hair down to my shoulders. And I had also what we would call today a lot of attitude. I went to school to socialize and see my girlfriend. I was a kind of adolescent bum. My father, on the other hand, worked 50 hours a week at a job he did not particularly like. He would come home from work and drop his heavy briefcase on the floor and in a loud voice proclaimed that he had labored one more day in hell. He was fond of telling me that if I did not buckle down and start studying, I wouldn't amount to a red penny. Now, I did not know what a red penny was, but it sounded like a bad thing. But this red penny business inflamed my attitude even more. Then one day, my parents had a talk with me about the length of my hair. The conversation got a bit out of hand, and I got the impression that I had to cut my hair or not live there anymore. I ran upstairs and flung myself on my bed, feeling completely victimized by my parents. A few minutes passed and I heard someone climbing the stairs. It was my father. He came into my room and sat down on my bed. He told me that no matter whether I amounted to a red penny or not, this was always my home. I could always live there. Then he stood up and cleared his throat and said, even if you end up driving a cab or being a laborer, your mother and I will always love you. I didn't realize it at the time, but later I realized that my father was forgiving me for being a bum, for being a disappointment, and for being 16. Now it was my turn to forgive him, but that would take a very long time. We sometimes form grievances against another that become fixed ideas in our minds and hearts. Those fixed ideas are hard to move out and so become part of our truth. I am damaged because I had a damaged father. That was my fixed idea. I am damaged because I had a damaged father. I found myself enjoying discussing my grievances with others who had their own grievances against their parents. It was like a grievance club in which we felt bad to feel good about our victimized selves. I felt I had a lot to be aggrieved about. My father was an atheist, and so did not encourage my own spiritual growth. In fact, he discouraged faith of any kind. He said ministers were like politicians who made promises they couldn't keep. That's pretty true in some ways. The world, according to my father, was dirty, tricky, and full of poverty and injustice. That, I said, took away my hope in any future I might have in my future in the world. He took away my hope, I said. But the worst thing my father did was to be afraid of death. He talked every day about death and how today could be our last day on earth. I'd be worried about a test the next day, and my father would say, "Don't worry, you may be dead by morning." That was my dad's way of cheering me up. But it was sort of like living in a hospice. I was the only kid in the 4th grade who had a will in his binder. My father would take the family on picnics to the cemetery because, as he said, he wanted to meet death face to face. This quirk of my father actually encouraged me to be curious about the afterlife. A curiosity which has led me to talk to over 100 near-death survivors, encounters which canceled out any fear of death I could imagine. But how could I get my grievance out of my mind completely? Only recently did I discover a way to scrub my mind of any lingering hatred I had for my father. Several years ago, I started to ask some of my clients what story they were telling about themselves, about life, their parents, their spouses, their children, and finally the story they told about God. The results surprised me. Almost all of the stories were stories of victimization. What God and what people had done to them. They were victim stories. It occurred to me that so many stories we tell ourselves in society are also victim stories. Inflation has me by the neck. The medical profession is killing me. Social media is always watching me. I began to realize that I was telling a victim story about my father. These stories of victimization made me feel defensive, self-righteous, and sorry for myself. A minister, Reverend Paula McDeechie, taught me that a new story was needed. A story of gratitude, however hard that may be. So I began to write gratitude letters to my father, who was in a nursing home in Lexington, Kentucky. I thanked him for teaching me to be an independent thinker, thinking outside the box, outside the church, and outside of society. I thanked him for my sense of humor. My father was very funny. At restaurants, if there was a wait and you had to sign in, he would write things like Joseph Stalin and family, Adolf Hitler and surviving henchmen, Bob Hope and friends. The hostess would announce us, and my father would stall, so she had to repeat it. People looked stunned. My sister and my mother and I were delighted. But what I am most grateful for is my father's insistence on telling the truth, at least when he wasn't joking. He would say that the truth should be sacred, worshiped even, and practiced with great precision. As I wrote these letters to him, my lingering hatred for my father drifted away, like the fog burned off by the sun. I completely forgave him. Now, this may work for you, or it may not. But it's one way to start moving towards a new story, one of gratitude rather than grievance. Now, what follows is the metaphysical part of my talk. It's just a little bit, and it's way out, okay? It's way out. I have come to believe that in all our encounters with living things and people, we are really dialoguing with God. When I was talking with my father, I was talking with God. When I talk to my wife, I'm talking with God. When I'm talking to my clients, I'm talking to God, and when they talk to me, they're talking back to God. We're trying to work things out with God. Will I tell a victimized story of God? Or will I tell a grateful story of God? Will we curse God or thank him or her or it? God is love. Do I tell the victimized story of love or grateful story of love? The victim story usually leads to war, while the grateful story leads to peace. I've done a lot of marriage counseling, some not so successful. When things get really hard, people have one thing to say to each other. They always say the same thing to one another when the marriage gets bad. And what they say is, look what you've done to me. Look what you have done to me. That's a victim story, and it's a sad one. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians are claiming each is the victim of the other. The story of victimization, whether in the big world or in our own homes, gets us nowhere. In our political discourse, we have ranted and raved about how the other person has hurt us, what they've done to us, what they're going to do to us. We're not forgiving. Now is the time to say, I don't know. I don't understand. Holy Spirit, lead me towards forgiveness and away from victimization. Lead me towards love. Thank you.